Hello, welcome to End or N-Gauge Model Railway. I was pleased with the scenic progress I'd started to make over Christmas, and over the last couple of weeks have continued where I left off. The first area to tackle was the hill at the end. The loose bits I'd left in place really didn't look great, and I was keen to turn this into a proper hill shape. Most of the hill needs to be removable for track cleaning, so for this next layer of land I used the largest bits of insulation foam that I still had available, for maximum strength and for it to sit flat on the base layer. I gradually cut small slices off using a knife until getting a shape I was happy with. This is always very messy, but I don't have a foam cutter that works on this dense foam, and wanted to spend the time making progress rather than shopping for and then waiting for a better foam cutter. Once happy with the shape of that layer, I used my next largest chunks of offcuts and found an arrangement for them that covered most of the volume of the next layer, making sure there was a good overlap where the two sections of the lower layer join. Since there were quite a few odd shapes, I thought it would be best to glue all of these pieces together before doing any more shaping, and in this case used Copydex glue, both because it gripped strongly and quite quickly, and because I was running out of PVA glue at that point. While that was drying, I moved on to more ballast experimentation. After my last video, I ordered some ballast made by Specialist Aggregates. It's marketed as being the correct size for N-Gauge, as opposed to having a generic name like medium or fine, and is branded true to scale. I was interested in how it would compare to the chinchilla sand. I cut a straight bit from a scrap piece of plywood and found an offcut of Code 55 Flexitrack. I wasn't sure how well or not ballast would attach directly to the plywood, so I added a thin layer of self-adhesive cork to give something for diluted glue to sink into. After attaching some track with Copydex, I left that to dry overnight. I wanted the Copydex to be fully dried before soaking it in diluted PVA to fix ballast in place. Having been left for about 5 hours, the insulation foam hill terrain had dried enough to be handled as one unit, but it still didn't feel all that strong at its main join, so I wanted to add a bit of bracing to it underneath. Having worked out roughly where the tunnel was, I glued a scrap piece of hardboard over the join. Every time this insulation foam is handled, it sheds small bits of foam, so I also painted the underside with diluted PVA to seal it, so when I remove it in future it doesn't shed so many pieces, especially in the tunnel where I might not notice them. The next day, when that was all dry, I confirmed the bracing piece of hardboard did fit inside the tunnel, allowing the removable section of hill to sit flat, and the removable section did feel more solid. For my ballast experiment, I did some rummaging and found the Woodland Scenics ballast I bought and experimented with at least 18 years ago. I ended up not liking its colour, but since I already had it, was interested to see how it compared to the chinchilla sand and true to scale ballast. While digging that out, I was also surprised to find I had a bag of Hornby Skale Scenery fine gravel, still unopened. I have absolutely no recollection of when I bought this, but I suspect it was a very long time ago. I started with the true to scale ballast. I assumed this would be the finest and would be a reference point to compare the suitability of the others, but it didn't seem all that different as I applied it. It was also relatively tricky to make neat and tidy. It didn't pour on very smoothly, and bits tended to flick away when gently nudged. I don't think it looked very good either. There's far too much contrast in the colours of individual grains. Some are black, while some are almost white or look translucent. The majority are a nice grey, but the speckled look created by the others looks very unrealistic. Perhaps it would be okay with heavy weathering, but it's not right for a fresh ballast look. It should be noted that this ballast is made from the same stone as real ballast, it's just smaller pieces. But that doesn't automatically make it look realistic in a different scale, and I think perhaps misses the point of making a model that looks like the real thing. Next up, I tried the Hornby Skale Scenery fine gravel. This one was the easiest to apply to the track. It poured very neatly and was very easy to push around without flicking all over the place. There's less variation in the size of grains, and they have a very uniform colour. On my computer, its true colour isn't really coming across. It's a grey with a tint of yellow, not really beige. I don't particularly like it personally. Overall, the grain sizes don't look much different to the true to scale ballast. Third was the Woodland Scenics fine ballast. This also behaved well. It wasn't quite as easy to work as the Hornby gravel, but a lot easier than the true to scale ballast. It's got a very consistent colour and overall looks smaller than true to scale, so if true to scale is okay for N-Gauge, then so is Woodland Scenics fine, assuming it's still made the same size as it was 18 years ago. Finally, the chinchilla sand. I found this the third hardest to work. but not much harder than the Woodland Scenics ballast. The true to scale ballast is by far the most difficult to pour and manipulate. As for size, I think the chinchilla sand has the biggest variation and also by far the biggest maximum. Some of these grains are going to be way oversized. For colour, I think it's the best. It's got variation but not extremes of contrast, and personally I prefer its shade of grey to the others. The final element of the ballast comparisons was to see how they look after being glued. I tried to speed up the drying process by putting the experiment in a warm place, but that resulted in the wood bowing up in the middle. I added a weight to it to counteract that. A few days later, when dry, they all looked darker, but not significantly. A few of you who commented on the previous video thought that chinchilla sand looked perfectly okay for N-gauge. Thank you for your comments. Personally, I'm still convinced it looks overscale, and actually I think even the true to scale N-gauge and Woodland Scenics fine ballasts do too. My perceptions of scale have been wrong plenty of times in the past though, so I searched through photos I've taken that have a good view of ballast. It's not something I photographed with this aim in mind, so I don't have that many that are at a good angle, but I've got enough to be able to confidently say all four of these ballasts look overscale compared with both the main line and with heritage lines. It's a shame these products, particularly the one marketed as being for N-gauge, don't look right, but I think they do still look good, and potentially I could find a suitably fine sieve to filter the chinchilla sand. However, the Code 55 track is about 20% overscale, and the 9mm gauge is 4% too narrow for a 1:148 scale anyway, so for now, for this railway, I intend to just carry on ballasting with the chinchilla sand as it is. Back to the hill. I carved and sanded the most recent layer, but there were gaps that needed filling where the chunks of foam hadn't been big enough. I decided to try filling those with toilet paper and glue because that would be lightweight, strong, and less prone to cracking than something like wall filler or plaster. I soaked shredded toilet paper in diluted PVA glue and squashed it into the necessary shapes. This left a very rough texture, but as something that was just to roughly fill the gaps, I wasn't too worried about that. It was more than a year ago that I shredded that toilet paper, using a paper shredder, but doing that took a long time because the shredder soon jams and bits need to be pulled out from it with tweezers. That shredded paper hasn't gone very far, so I switched to just using whole pieces of toilet paper. I found that if they were soaked quite thoroughly and quite compressed into the scenery, I was able to get a fairly smooth finish to the surface texture. But I only did that in a few places because it uses a lot of toilet paper and glue. There are a couple of big downsides to this approach compared with using filler. It takes about a week to dry, and the paper generally slips down from where it was first put. Several days later, I added the final layers to the hill, using a thinner but wider offcut of foam that I hadn't previously found. This time I was able to use deliberately slightly oversized pieces for most of the volume, which I glued in place and then another day cut and sanded as if they were one piece. Overall, it would have been much quicker and easier with large pieces of foam, rather than making do with various offcuts, but that would have wasted a lot more material. The foam is cheap, it's just the environmental conscience factor that makes the extra effort potentially worthwhile. I have, though, ordered a new foam cutter. I don't think I'll need to do much more foam cutting for land on Endor, but there's still the T-gauge layout and whatever replaces Endor one day, so I might as well have it ready. For this hill, I thought I'd try an alternative to plaster cloth for its outer shell. First of all, I added a plastic barrier to stop the removable part getting stuck to the tunnel layer. With that in place, I covered the hill in kitchen towel paper soaked in slightly diluted PVA glue. I thought I'd be able to smooth this out, but it didn't work as well as I'd hoped. I think it's because the kitchen towel is good at holding moisture. That's basically its job, and instead of stretching to the shape of the land, it just rippled in various places. It had mostly dried after 24 hours, going hard and translucent. It has done a good job of smoothing the shape over different blocks of foam, and in changing the texture over the area with the spiky toilet paper, but those ripples are there to stay. That's all I've done with the hill so far. It's at least looking a lot more like the shape of a hill now. While the kitchen towel had been drying, I started adding more ballast to the tracks, using chinchilla sand. It was pretty easy to extend either way from the experimental section because there aren't any power wires and associated baseboard holes on the curve. That's all drying now, and will be for several days. So, Endor has continued to come alive. I've enjoyed being able to make it look better, and as much as I've been enjoying my project to make my own decoders, I'm also enjoying a bit of a break from having to think hard. I'm also not expecting any pre-ordered locomotives to arrive imminently. So now is a good time to make scenic progress that takes the railway out of use. That's all for now. Bye bye!